Hello, my name is Omid Safi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this talk on the life and the teachings of Rumi. Rumi, better known in the West as Maulana or Mevlana, meaning our master, is perhaps the single greatest love poet and mystic of the Islamic tradition. His popularity stretches from South Asia to Afghanistan and Iran, to Central Asia, to Turkey and Bosnia, and now today in Europe and North America. He was so beloved in his own time period that even during his own life, people started calling him the Farzande Jan Mustafa, the offspring of the soul of the Prophet. The offspring of the soul of the Prophet. They so came to associate him not only with the statements about the Prophet, and not only with the actions of the Prophet Muhammad, but rather, if you would, with the heart of the Prophet, with the very spiritual essence of the Prophet. When Rumi passes away, in fact, we're told that Muslims, Jews, and Christians were weeping, and the Sultan summons them over and says, well, we understand why the Muslims are crying, because Rumi was one of them. Why are you, Jews and Christians, crying? And they say, well, we never thought that we would meet someone with our own eyes, that when we would see him, it would give us a taste of what being with Jesus would have been like, what being with Moses would have been like. And this is indeed a part of how I think it's helpful for us to approach Rumi. Sometimes when we think about these sages and illuminated beings and perhaps, if you would, spiritual giants, there's a tendency to treat them as a one-off, as a standalone. And truth be told, in some of the ways in which Rumi is represented in the West, where there are a whole set of statements attributed to him, but he appears at times as a kind of New Age mystic that's just floating above time and space and religious traditions, and it's hard to see him as part of a long-standing tradition. If you take that word of being a spiritual giant seriously, sometimes I find it helpful to think about mountains and tall mountains, perhaps like Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world, the most glorious, majestic mountain of them all. And yet, even Everest does not stand alone. Everest is part of a much longer range of mountains, the Himalayas, and it is these mountains that stretch far and wide, that they stay rooted and grounded in the earth, and they push one another to higher and higher heights. Everest would not be able to reach so far and so high towards the heavens were it not for its connection and its indebtedness to these other mountains. And so it is with Rumi. The great Maulana, our master, our teacher, which is how he's referred to in the East. The Persians call him Maulana, the Turks pronounce it as Mevlana, same word. The great, our teacher, Rumi, is part of a 500-year tradition of poets and dreamers, lovers, and sages that extend all the way back to the being of the Prophet Muhammad. Each generation makes its own contribution. Each generation adds its own nuance, perhaps a story, perhaps an insight. And in fact, we see Rumi do this. he not only refers to these earlier Muslim sages, at times he takes their insights and goes one step further, develops it, reframes it. So it's helpful to see Rumi as part of this longer trajectory. So what we're going to do in this talk is we're going to take you through the teachings of Rumi, and we're going to do so by talking about the way in which the first few hundred years of Islamic spirituality, they tended to use the language of love, hubb, mahabba, which is the language that the Quran uses. In particular, there's a very powerful phrase in the Quran, yuhibbuhum wa yuhibbunahu. God will bring forth a people, God loves them and they love God. So almost every Muslim mystic worth her salt would cite this particular verse of the Noble Quran and talk about how it is God's love for us that has enabled us to love one another and even to love God. We hear the same insights, of course, in the New Testament. About 150 years or so before the time of Maulana Rumi, there is a formative revolution that takes place in the world of Islam, and in particular in the universe of Islamic spirituality. And this is what we call mazhab-e-ishq, the path of radical love, radical love. And on my online series of courses, through illuminated courses, I teach a whole course on the path of radical love. I would love to invite you to join us there. The radical love tradition goes back to the younger brother of the more famous Muslim theologian Imam al-Ghazali, known as Ahmad Ghazali, and his main disciple, Ain al-Ghazat Hamadani. What is the contribution that they make? They introduce the concept of ishq. Ishq, which I have translated as radical love. Ishq, which they define as hubb or mahabba, when it exceeds all the bounds. Love, when it becomes extreme love, radical love. Of course, in English, the word radical does have the connotation of going back to the root of something, to the heart of something, which is exactly, as we'll see, the way that Rumi uses that phrase. When Ahmad Ghazali is talking about radical love, he says, I will write you your book on love on one condition, that you never again make a distinction, a bifurcation of divine love and human love, because you have to know that there is one love, right? Bob Marley was a great follower of radical love, that if you want to love Allah, you have to commit yourself to the love of humanity. And this tradition, this wisdom and insight, shows up in Rumi's writings, of course. Here is one of the popular paintings that we get depicting Maulana Rumi, this beloved sage. And until quite recently, when you would go to visit Rumi's shrine in Konya, and every year more than 1 million people, pilgrims of different nationalities and different faiths come, they would see a poem there that at times has been attributed to Rumi, at times to other people. And the poem starts with, come, come, whoever you are. Baza, baza, come back, come. Whoever you are, whatever you are, come back. Ger kafir o gabro bud parasti baza. Even if you are an infidel, even if you are a fire worshipper, even if you are an idol worshipper, come. In dargah ma درگه نومیدی نیست. 100 بار اگر توبه شکستی باز آ. This abode of ours, this sacred, royal gathering place of ours, is no place to be hopeless. Even if you've repented 100 times and broken your vows 100 times, come again. So Rumi's message was taken as this open-hearted, generous invitation for people to return to the spiritual path. And Rumi's shrine, alongside Rumi's poetry and the stories about him, continue to be this open invitation. Now, Rumi himself, as we said, came from a long lineage of sages. His own father was an extraordinary mystic. We have his writings available to us through a book called the Ma'arif. Baha'u'ddin was his father's name. His father had many visionary experiences. But for the early part of his life, Rumi was more or less a very distinguished scholar. He used to teach in a madrasa, which is a university. He used to teach religious subjects, law in particular, in a madrasa, in a seminary, in a university. It is when he meets an extraordinary mystic named Shams Tabrizi, that he combines what was merely intellectual with what is also experiential. It's the blending together of the head knowledge and the heart illumination that produces a Rumi. And we've got wonderful stories about their encounter that give us some indication of their connection. One of my very favorite stories that we get is that Rumi is sitting there studying a book of very intricate and difficult literature. It might be poetry, it might be mysticism. And Shams, this slightly irreverent rogue of a character, comes by and he says, what are you doing? And Rumi just can't be bothered. He's deeply immersed in this study, and he just says, I'm studying this difficult stuff. You wouldn't understand. It's above your pay grade. You wouldn't understand. And Shams says, okay. And he snatches the book out of Rumi's hand and throws it down a water well. Now, in this society, there are no printed books. There's no PDFs. Every single book has to be lovingly copied by hand. If you want to have a copy of a text, it might take weeks and months for someone to finish copying it. Every book is sacred. This is a tradition in which God takes an oath by the pen and paper and ink and writing. Writing is sacred. Before you pick up a pen, you do your ablutions. You always remember the words of the Prophet that the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. A statement which the scholars, of course, love very much. So the story only works if you know that books are sacred, that writing is sacred, they're precious. So Shams takes this book and throws it down. We're not going to throw this. A water well. And Rumi is flabbergasted. He says, that was my special book. What are you doing? Shams reaches down the well, brings out the book. Of course, it is unharmed. He hands it back to him and he says, you wouldn't understand. Right? These stories, which are always intended to embed themselves in your consciousness, to be something that you recall and you remember, give us some indication of the transformative power of mystical teaching. It is not only about listening to new stories, it's not only about having someone tell you the story, it's about living them, taking them to heart. The analogy that the Sufis themselves always use, it's the difference between having someone write the words Honey on a board, or even someone bringing a bowl of honey in front of you and letting you look at it, maybe even letting you touch it, or maybe even for them, the teacher, to take the honey and put it in their own mouth and say, it sure is sweet. And then you say, I do declare that the teacher has said that that bowl of honey contains something that's really sweet. But then there's the next level. And the next level is when you get to put your own finger in your own bowl of honey and to take that honey and to put it in your own mouth. And you get to taste it for yourself, experience it for yourself. Not only testifying that somebody else has tasted, what have you tasted? This was in fact the ultimate gift that Shams offers Rumi. Shams was always asking, how long are you going to ride this horseless saddle? How long are you going to walk with someone else's walking staff? When are you going to rise up and walk on your own feet, taste on your own, journey on the path, using the feet and the head and the heart and the being that Allah has blessed you with? So this is the being that Rumi becomes. He is that rare saintly being, close friend of God, who is an incomparable poet, the most wonderful of storytellers, and also someone who launches a whole Sufi community that survives right up until our own day, present in many different countries. And so there's a body of literature, there's stories, and there is also a community. Many of us in the West might have seen the description of the whirling dervishes, right? It's ironic that we sometimes use the term to be frantically working, running all over the place as being a whirling dervish. If you observe the meditative dance of the whirling dervishes, it is anything but frantic. It is serene. It is a person who, in some ways, akin to yoga, has figured out how to pray with their body. There is a concentration on the breath and that perfect balance of activity and repose. On one hand, you are actively moving through the world. On the other hand, you are receptive towards what God is revealing to you in your heart. The whirling dervishes represent one of those sacred examples alongside other traditions like Qawwali music in South Asia and the Sufi music of Iran and Central Asia and elsewhere, of a sacred tradition of music and movement. And there is a meaning attached to every single ritual associated with it. One of the most beautiful ones is that if you observe the movement, some people call it the dance, the sacred movement of the dervishes, you notice that as they unfurl their arms, that the right hand is always turned upward towards heaven, and the left hand is always turned down towards the earth. It's a reminder that whatever it is that they are bringing forth is not their own. They are channeling what it is that they're receiving from God receptively and actively releasing it on the earth. It's the imagery of dancing in the rain, where you collect that rain, which is always a symbol of mercy, rahmat. You let it flow through you and you release it onto the earth. So a dervish is someone who is passive and receptive of what God is revealing to you in your heart, and actively involved in alleviating suffering and to bring light and love and beauty and harmony into this world. Of course, to have the water of life, all the hayat, flow through you, receiving it in one hand and releasing it in the other, you got to empty yourself. You got to make a conduit of your own being. You have to empty your being of the ego, the blockage of the ego. There are teachers, male and female, that stand in Rumi's lineage. Here's one of the most important ones in our own world today, a Turkish female Sufi teacher named Jamal Nur. Jamal, beauty, Nur, light. Right? That's a given name. Imagine being born as beauty and light. Here we see the way that people in Rumi's lineage recorded Rumi's poetry. This is the opening lines of Rumi's masterpiece, the Masnavi. بشنو از نی چون حکایت می کند از جدایی ها شکایت می کند. Listen to the reed as it tells a tale and how it complains and laments from separations. کز نیستان تا مرا ببریده اند در نفیرم مرد و زن نالیده اند. I used to be in this bed of reeds, in this abode of reeds. They cut me from there, brought me here, and ever since then, men and women, everyone is sharing in my lament. So Rumi starts his collection of the Masnavi with an extraordinary musical analogy. The ney, the flute. The reed flute, which is cut, separated from the bed of reeds. If you take a reed and you try to play music with it, blow in it, there's no sound that's going to come out of it because it's still filled. It's got all of its crud inside of it. So the reed has to be made hollow. And we too, before the divine breath can flow through us, we have to empty ourselves of our ego. He starts by talking about the story of the reed flute as one that begins by complaining about separations. And many people are surprised when they start to read Rumi's poetry. They've heard that he's the greatest mystic poet, perhaps in the history of the world, and they expect to open up his book of poetry and that on page 1, he's going to be talking about ecstatic love. Oh, there is ecstatic love, but that's not where he begins. Rumi is following that prophetic advice, the counsel of the Prophet Muhammad, who said, speak to people at their level. Speak to people at the level of their understanding, their intellect. If you want to reach people's hearts, go to them where they are. Well, look around you. Look inside yourself. Most human beings are carrying an extraordinary amount of pain and suffering. Perhaps that pain and suffering is what has been bringing them to the path, is what has them search for something deeper, for a sense of meaning. So many people go through a kind of trauma, a death, a disease, losing a job, having a loved one leave them, and that's what launches them on seeking. So what does Rumi say here? He says, yes, I too have suffered in this life. We all have undergone pain. And then he prays for a heart that has been broken open. Every heart breaks. And sometimes the breaking of the heart leads to it breaking open. We pray that every heartache and every breaking of your heart is one that leads to the heart breaking open. It's only after he has taken you and sat with you by sitting with your pain, sitting with your suffering. It might be being homesick. It might be having a loved one who's separated from you. It might be having a child or a parent who lives far away. It might be a sense of being cosmically alone, even cut off from God, from meaning, from love, from truth. For some people, it's a sense that they used to have dreams in life. They thought life was going to turn out a certain way, but it's turned out to be something different. They're cut off from their own highest aspirations. And Rumi sits with you before taking you by the hand and saying, we're not bound to live like this. We're going to deal with the crud of our own ego. We're going to go on this journey of love. And I tell you, there is the possibility of illumination, of sanctification. In the first few pages of the Masnavi, he invites you to go into the root of the root of the root of the faith and of yourself. He uses the analogy of a tree. Every tree has a root, but what is it that roots the root? Where do you get your sustenance from? What keeps you rooted and grounded in life? When you hit the first serious storm of life, and it's coming, for all of us, it has come, and it is coming, and it will come. Do you know what to turn to? And whatever it is that you turn to for support, what's grounding that? If you turn to your mama, what's grounding your mama? If you turn to your spiritual community, to an exercise regiment, what's grounding that? Go deeper. Go to the heart of the heart of the heart. As we continue reading in Rumi's Masnavi, he gives you a beautiful analogy, which one could spend a whole lifetime trying to perfect. This is a poem that many people know and love. In English, it's known as the Guesthouse poem. And the poem basically says, treat your heart as a guest house. Every day, there comes a new emotion. Think about how we usually talk about our emotions, right? We ask one another, how are you? And we say, I'm happy. I'm okay. I'm sad. I'm happy. I'm sad. We're making an equation between I, your I-ness, who and what you fundamentally are, and these passing emotions, joy and sadness. Rumi's telling you, instead of seeing yourself as the rain and a cloud, you are the whole sky. Observe your emotions coming and going. Be a generous host to them. Look, here comes Joy. Oh, Joy, you are one of my favorite guests. I love it when you come to visit. Come on in. You know where you belong. Make yourself at home. I know you might stay for a few days. And then, as the Sufis always say, this too shall pass. How gracefully, graciously you welcome Joy, and then you watch Joy depart. Here comes Sadness. Hello, Sadness. You have been such a faithful friend to me. There have been some times in my life that no other guests came to visit me, but you faithfully kept on coming back. You know exactly where you like to go. Go make yourself at home. I know you're going to stay for 3 days, few months, and then this too shall pass. It's no wonder that so many of us have a hard time being gracious with one another when we've never learned how to be gracious with ourselves. We fight our emotions. We suppress them. Rumi's telling you to adopt a perspective. You are the whole sky. Graciously welcome them. Don't identify with them fully. They're your guests. Tend to them. Make them feel at home and know that they too shall pass. Remember the one who is always with you and never leaves. All of this is part of Rumi's teachings on how to become a real human being. He takes an old Greek story of Diogenes, the man who was walking around the bright daylight with a lit torch, right? A crazy image. Why would you need a lit torch or a candle in the daylight? And he's going around the marketplace and people say, "What you looking for?" And Rumi translates that story and he says, "As divud dad malulam insanam arazust." I am sick and tired of these two-legged beasts and demons. I'm searching for one real human being. And people say to him, "Ah, a real human being, there's none of those to be found here." And Rumi says, that one that you say is not to be found, that's the one that I'm searching for. Rumi's tradition has added another phrase, that one that you say is not to be found, that's the one that I'm searching for, or I'm going to become that one. That's the whole goal of our life, is to fulfill the cosmic purpose of existence. We are not a flesh bag of leather. You are, as Rumi says at one point, cosmic stardust. Your very being is made up of the stuff of the heavens. And you're suffused with the Spirit of God. In the path of love, we're taught that as God is kneading and molding the clay of humanity, she spends 70,000 years on each human, casting love glances in every second of every minute of every hour of every one of those 70,000 years. The divine casts 70,000 love glances. You are cosmic stardust mingling with divine love glances. What would it be like to cherish one's own being and others in that way? To link together your full divine love glanced humanity with others. And then people say, well, you know, I look inside myself and I just don't see that. I feel lost. And Rumi's answer in his Masnavi is, honey, we're all lost. Every one of us is lost in the sea of existence. But I tell you, we have a go home button. The go home button is what the medievals used to call an astrolabe. This was that navigation device that the Muslims perfected. You see some examples of it here. And they could line it up with the North Star, and they could find east and west, north and south, and find their way home. And Rumi says, radical love, ishq, is the astrolabe of the heart. It's the astrolabe of the secrets of God. You have a go home button. You want to find your way back to God, you have that. And you can hit it and it will take you home. And that button is love. Love not merely as an emotion that comes and goes, but radical love as Rumi and the mountain range that comes before him has always understood it. When we say love, what we're speaking of is really the unleashing of God onto this realm. It is love that created you. It is love that sustains you. You are swimming in this cosmic current of love. And if you can, just for one moment, get over yourself, get over your egoistical qualities, and connect your deep humanity to the deep humanity of others, you can merge into this cosmic current of love, and love is going to take you home, take you back to that same divine origin that we've never really left. So love is the path, love is the origin, and love is the destination. He offers us an analogy that says, as the Prophet Muhammad ascended through the levels and layers of heaven to see God face to face, the faithful too can have their own ascension, and our ascension is through love. At another point he says, our ascension is through prayer. We're getting closer to our conclusion. He tells you that this teaching is not just abstract. It calls for the transformation of every one of our faculties. There's a wonderful story that he tells that the great Majnun, the wonderful poet whose praise, whose love poems for the beautiful Layla had become famous worldwide, that the poetry of Majnun reaches the ear of the ruling caliph. And the caliph says, well, whoever this Layla is, I've got to meet this girl. So he summons all the women from Layla's village to be brought to his court. And he's so excited to finally get to meet Layla. And so he goes and he looks at the women assembled before him, and he's expecting one of them to just stand out, one of them to be worthy of the poetry that Majnun has been composing. And all of these women just look normal, average. I think my college kid calls it basic. So he's very confused, and he looks at them and he goes, is one of you all Layla? And then the real Layla steps forward. And in this tradition, the women talk back. And the caliph looks at her and goes, you? You, plain, ordinary you? You are Layla? And Layla looks to the caliph and goes, I am Layla. But you are not Majnun. In order to see the beauty of Layla, you have to learn to look through the eyes of Majnun. Part of what Rumi's tradition consists of is the need to have each one of our faculties transformed. The way we look at one another has to be transformed. We have to develop Majnun eyes. We have to have Majnun ears where we listen to one another, not just looking to interrupt one another to make the next clever point. Listen through love. Glance through love. Hear what is being said and strive to hear what is at the heart. When we speak, can our words be words of love? When we touch, can it be a touch that would never harm, never seek to possess, but would only be an invited touch that seeks to comfort? There's the need for transformation of the body alongside the soul. The last story that Rumi leaves us with is the last story from Rumi that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And it's the story of Imam Ali. Imam Ali, who for Rumi is a model of what it means to be a perfectly realized human being, to be an illuminated soul. The story is quite well known. It had been circulated before. We know that Ali, who was this brave, chivalrous youth, engages this warrior in hand-to-hand combat. At some point, he picks up this gigantic warrior, throws him to the ground, sits on his chest, and is about to take out his famous sword, which is so famous it has its own name, Zulfaqar. It's a two-edged sword. Is gonna cut off his head. And this mountain man, this warrior who has never lost a battle before, is so disgusted at having lost to Ali that he spits on Ali's face. And Ali immediately gets up from his chest and he puts his sword back. And because this is Rumi, they proceed to have a 20-page mystical dialogue. At first, the warrior says, you had me beat, fair and square. Why didn't you just finish me off? And Ali says, when I defeated you, everything that I had done was for the sake of God. You spat on my face, I got angry. If I kill you now, I would only be killing you for the sake of my own ego. But you see, I am the real mountain here. The wind of anger is not going to move me to action. I might get angry, but anger will never move me to action. I might be made out of dust, but I'm drowned in light. I'm bathing in divine light. The only thing that will blow me away is the face of my Lord. The warrior says, wow, these teachings of yours sound great. How does one become a Muslim and a Sufi? And he does. And then they continue on their mystical dialogue. And this is the part where the journey of Rumi takes us from suffering and brokenness to the path of love and becoming a real human being. And the goal is to become an illuminated being that sees yourself and your humanity connected with all. The warrior says, okay, now I've become Muslim. Now I've joined the path of love. Tell me the truth. When you were sitting on my chest, and you had your sword out, there was something like a lightning bolt that I saw in your eye. Tell me the truth. What was it? And Ali says, if you really want to know the truth, when I was sitting on your chest and I was about to kill you, I looked into your eyes and I saw a reflection of myself. And I realized in that moment that if I kill you, then Ali has killed Ali. You and I are bound up together. We're wrapped up in one another. How can Ali kill Ali? That's the conclusion of our mystical journey. The spiritual path of the heart is not only an individual path. It is not only about the transformation of one heart. It also has to lead to the redemption and transformation of the way that we as human beings relate to one another. Spirituality and mysticism, love and ethics all connect together. Love comes into the public. And when love comes into public, we call it justice. The path of love has to lead to the transformation of the way that we form the human community. So I think we're going to stop there. We'd love to extend an invitation. If the world's condition ever allows us, you'd be welcome to come with us to see Rumi Shrine on one of the programs that we have through Illuminated Tours. And in the meantime, you're welcome to go online and look at Illuminated courses, where we have courses on Rumi and the Qur'an and the spiritual tradition, the Sufi tradition. And perhaps you could start with a much more in-depth and gentle and patient tasting, taking this honey into your own mouth, of the course that we have, The Heart of Rumi's Poetry, at illuminatedcourses.com. I want to thank you for the gift of your time, of this opportunity to share these teachings together, and for your generosity. Thank you.